Well, for the first time ever, the province officially recognized Black History Month here in Alberta. But is that enough? Well, that's the question that we have tonight for our diversity panel, joined now by Mary, Junetta, and Beatrice. Thanks so much for coming in. So let's talk about this move that the province put forth to officially recognize Black History Month. It's been obviously celebrated and recognized in Alberta unofficially for many years. But was this a significant step? Was this a purposeful step? Or is this just largely symbolic?
I'd say at this point in time, it's largely symbolic. And I make that point because nothing else has been said. We have engaged in no concrete plans of action that this is going to do anything to affect real systemic change. So until we have some of those conversations and beyond that, action plans, it's symbolic.
Is that fair? Do you both agree with that?
Oh, yes.
I agree. I agree that it's symbolic, a good symbol in itself, but we'll need something more concrete going forward. Edmonton has become a city where we say these nice pronouncements, but I'd like to see concrete steps to actually address some of the things that make Black History Month meaningful to some of us in the manner that we would like to see it.
So let's talk about that then. We talk about the notion of moving beyond symbolism. There was an editorial recently in Metro that suggested to do that, you have to kind of embrace real policy. And some of the suggestions mentioned in that refer to street checks and carding, which we've certainly seen, I think, in larger urban centers here in Canada, even though most Canadians would be like, what, that's actually happening here? Mm-hmm. Do you think that that is the key? Like, those are the things that we need to focus on at this juncture?
Yes, I absolutely do. So there's three key areas. So we can have the month of historical recognition, but then there's the other 11 months that we live this out. Mm-hmm. So what is going to make a change within the lives of members of the Black community? You mentioned policing. Let's start there. We need to see changes in policy and practice. The other area is workplace discrimination. The stuff that goes on and the way that it affects us, affects our minds, our souls, is unbelievable. And then education reform. So there's this whole curricular review and revamp undergoing. We need to have inclusion, and not just inclusion as it's perceived from on high, but be an active participation in crafting what that historical contribution is within the curriculum.
Yeah, and I think the representation in all these sectors, like if you see in different levels of government, in education, you don't see too much diversity. You see it on the streets of Edmonton, but why don't you see it there? You know, like, those are the hard questions that we need to ask. And how are those being taken seriously as policies that can make change for the future? We don't see those things happening. Why is it not percolating down to that level?
Oh. I suspect that part of the reason for that is, and we need to look at ourselves as a province, as a people, as Canadians, and have difficult conversation. I like people to think deeply about why is this happening and where do we start to address it. Some of these things I believe are symptoms as well, that the policing do what is what it is. But we need to get down to the really cause of it all. Who are we? How do I relate to you? What value do I bring to you as someone who has come in looking different than you? I have something to share with you which would enrich you. So if we can start looking at a way that we can get that embracing, to share, to get to understand, then we start dealing with some of the symptoms that manifest themselves at the street level.
Do you think that perhaps, and again, you take a look in particular what's happening down south of the border, and there definitely seems to be a very vocal front in terms of trying to address some of these systemic issues. Whereas here in Canada, there's always been this sort of perception, well, we're not as bad as the U.S. Yes. Do you think that that's a big hurdle in terms of addressing these issues?
So you mean denial?
Yeah, mostly is what it is. Yes, Canadians are in pretty severe denial, I think.
Canadians are in total denial. You know, when you just look at, let's just take the West, okay? When you look at how these settler states, the provinces were established, they used starvation to get rid of the indigenous or quarantine the indigenous population. That means that's foundational to what we've now come in as what I look at as a societal overlay that we are now all a part of. So when you talk about getting to the root, Beatrice, and like looking at where this actually stems from, you're going to have to tell the truth, scratch that denial, and you're going to have to go right back to the beginning when this state was formed.
And that's why I call it a difficulty conversation, because it's not something that we're used to doing, saying, hey, you're good, I'm good, scratch my back and scratch yours. It's deep stuff that we have to face, akin to the truth and reconciliation that we had with the First Nations people. But I look at it, there is hope. I am an eternal optimist. There is hope in this this province that we can overcome this, because people are willing. In fact, I tend to think that people are largely uninformed about other people. When I tell somebody I was born in Nairobi, I went to school, people cannot figure out. When I pass my transcripts, they don't understand what that means. But there is, I believe that there is something that we can do. The reason I say this, in the article that was recently in the National Post, they talk about Mr. Edwards. When he left Canada and went to Oklahoma and strolled into a store in 1946 where a black person did not walk into a store and say, give me cigarettes. But he did, slapped his cents on the table and said, give me this and this. And the storekeeper followed him to say, hey, you don't come from here. No, I come from Canada. And it was not Canada of Halifax or Montreal. It was from Alberta. And that's why I believe that where there's major difficulties, there we can find solutions.
And Beatrice, not just from Canada, he came from an all-black settlement of which he was the head of.
Is that right?
Oh, yes. So he embodied self-determination.
Yes.
It was self-determination that walked into that store and slapped down that money for them cigarettes or whatever he bought. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Concurred?
Completely. I mean, I truly believe that you have to get to the history when you start these conversations, and it is not an easy thing, so most people don't want to do it, but I think we have to start somewhere.
Well, and you know what? I think this panel today is certainly helping to contribute to that conversation, and hopefully we can tap into that hope that you're talking about,
Absolutely.
Beatrice. There you have it. That is your Friday edition of the Diversity Panel. Thanks so much for coming in to talk about this.
Thank
Thank you for having
All right,
us.
we're going to take a little bit of a break. Don't go too far. We've got more dinner television just around the corner. Stay tuned.